you've trained so many people. Have you, and I saw on the site, you're talking from top athletes to MMA fighters to untrained grandmothers that come and have trained with you. I would love to hear some stories that may at least piggyback off of what I was just mentioning, as far as, in the mind, mental acuity, focus, even emotional, feeling like you belong in your own body, a little bit more confidence, because these are all the things that I found from doing movement, a lot from what I've learned from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Katie Bowman has a book out called Dynamic Aging, which covers a lot of this research, and Stephen Jenkinson has talked about it a lot as well. But essentially, your brain remains young neurologically. Like the morphology of your brain will not develop some of the symptoms of aging if you're regularly learning new challenges. Specifically, motor challenges are especially valuable, I believe. So this makes sense if you understand the purpose of a brain. The purpose of a brain, the primary purpose of a brain, is to control movement. And this is something that's really coming out of cognitive science right now, but it's really challenging to a lot of presuppositions that we've had essentially since the dawn of the Enlightenment, right? Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Right? As we were trying to understand science and Newtonian physics and, this idea of the clockwork universe, there was this assertion of the idea that essentially human beings had souls or psyches, and that these had free will. But then basically everything else about the world is just mechanism. It's just clockwork. And so the part of us that is next to the angels is just the mind. And that turns out to be a really profound misunderstanding of the relationship between the body and the mind, because they can't really be separated. And this has come out of AI research, cognitive science, and all of these things. So a really beautiful example that is given, I can't remember the name of the researcher, he has a TED Talk. So hopefully we can find that. But he talks about the idea that sea squirts are a very primitive animal, and they go through two life stages. In one life stage, they're mobile and they're moving around in the ocean. And then they attach themselves to a rock and they behave sort of like a barnacle, right? And when they became sessile, which is the technical term, they digest their own nervous system. So the nervous system evolved to control movement. And that's primarily what nervous systems do. And so cognition is really bootstrapped on top of motor control. And one of the best ways to understand what we're actually doing when we're thinking is to think of it as essentially entering a simulation of potential motor actions to guide how we behave. I think it was Alfred Whitehead, who said, Alfred North Whitehead, I think is his name, who said, "We think that our thoughts may die and we don't have to." You can imagine something like a mosquito. A mosquito has thousands of offspring, and almost all of them die, right? And that's the Darwinian process. The few survivors are fit. Well, what a human being does is they have thousands of thoughts and then don't act out the vast majority of them. We essentially apply the Darwinian process within our mind to how we might behave before we arrive at the behavior. And what we're doing is much more oriented towards movement than we realize. And when you start digging down into the role that metaphor plays, we can't even think about the world without reference to these physical things. So we say, for instance, that we want to be able to express ourselves. Well, to express something is to move air out. Right? That's what it comes from. Right? Or our terms for soul, like pneuma, that's air, right? Essence, that's air moving in and out, right? When we say that we understand something, we're standing under it, right?
Yeah.
I ask, oh, do you grasp what I'm saying? We're constantly referring to these movement metaphors, and the reality is that cognition arises in a relationship between an actor, an agent, and an environment. What my friend John Rafe calls the agent-arena relationship. So we think that the way that we perceive the world is sort of objective, in the sense that the objects that we see are inherently have the inherent meaning, right? The meaning is kind of in the object, maybe. And then romanticism tells us the opposite, that the meaning is all in our heads, or maybe that's what postmodernism tells us. But the meaning really arises mutually, right, between the development of the agent and the arena. And you can't program a thinking machine very easily at all to see the world, to perceive the world the way that we perceive the world. So the example I always give is a cup, right? So if you try to program a computer to understand what a human being perceives as a cup, you'll find it's extremely hard to find the criteria that designates all cups and removes all things that are not cups. Because we use plastic things, and we use glass things, and we use metal things, and they can come in any number of shapes and any number of colors, right? And if you don't get your criteria set up very well, absolutely perfectly, which is almost impossible, you can't get the computer to recognize that. Famous example of this is you try to categorize fish and birds, right? And you teach a computer how to categorize fish or birds, but then you show it a penguin and the computer crashes. So how do you get the solution to the cup problem? Well, the solution to the cup problem is to give the computer a hand, right? Some sort of hand-like object, and then give it a program that requires it to move liquid from one place to another. And all of a sudden, what a cup is starts to be generated by the AI. So what a cup is an affordance, right? It's a opportunity for action relevant to the specific action capabilities, grasping hands and a specific size of a human being, and our inherent motivational frame, which is to take in things that nourish us. So liquids. So I don't know. I feel like I may have lost the thread of what you were asking, but
well, I dig that.
You have that you have to understand, okay, because we were talking about health in the brain.
Yeah.
The brain exists to move you. That's its first purpose. And when you understand that, and you understand that your brain will atrophy, just like the sea squirt's brain, when it's no longer being used to acquire new, novel movement patterns. And that's why human beings play, and that's why human beings are actually the most playful animals, because we're the most behaviorally flexible animals, and we have the longest development period. So if you want to keep developing and you don't want to atrophy, and you really only have one direction, development or atrophy, then you need to keep moving.
I love that. There's so much that brings to mind. For one, I was on the Tim Pool podcast last night, and he was talking about. Do you know Tim Pool?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So he was talking about CAPTCHA. You know, where you tell the system. He said we haven't needed CAPTCHA forever. We're teaching AI how to see. But, you know, that's one of the main things, like, you know, find the bicycle in this, and, you know, you're teaching it to see from different angles, slightly hidden by different things. So that was kind of interesting. You mentioned the sea squirt, and another interesting thing about the sea squirt, slight correlation to this, is that's the earliest known creature to have cannabinoid receptors. And so that's long before cannabis even. And the interesting thing is there's a lot of research that's now showing the runner's high is actually an endocannabinoid phenomena. There are other neurochemical cascades in conjunction with that. But the one thing that seems to sit on top of that is highly excited through a lot of movement is the endocannabinoid system. And I found that very interesting, that the runner's high is now being more associated with the endocannabinoid system. I'm going to have to, at the end, go through all these names that you threw out there. You said yak pansep? Pansep. Could you spell that real quick?
Yeah, it's JAAKPANKSEPP, I think.
Is that Dutch? Sounds Dutch.
Yeah, very Dutch.
Yeah.
I would also love to give the audience a little preview of some of the movement, this natural movement that you're really into, Rafe. So I've got something queued up. And this one is called The Return to Joy, Parkour in Nature. And I'll let you guys enjoy just getting a little glimpse of what we're kind of referring to in action here.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.